I think this administration has not shown a desire for reform, but rather just a desire to rip apart communities, to make people less safe, to try and isolate certain people in this country based on the accent that they have, demanding that people show papers who are American citizens. That is not how we do things in this country. So I think the Trump administration has shown a desire to be hateful as opposed to being hopeful in the sense of being able to create a pathway to some real reform. And their divisiveness is making all of us less safe.
Good to be with you. I'm Katie Tur. That was Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro on what we've been witnessing in Minneapolis. There is new polling today on support for ICE, a new threat from the president to invoke the Insurrection Act, and new reporting from the Washington Post about a potential homicide inside an ICE facility. I spoke to the governor at length about ICE and immigration and what a coherent and successful immigration policy should be. They are important answers from a man who is both leading a hugely important swing state and a man who could be one of the top contenders for Democrats in 2028. We also talked about affordability, unemployment, AI, and the job market, and why he was at the White House today working with Trump cabinet officials. Here is that conversation in full. Governor Shapiro, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Katie.
I know you were at the White House today, and I want to talk about that. But I want to get to the news that's been dominating everything, and that is immigration. What we've been witnessing in Minnesota, the violent clashes, the death. In the face of this, support for ICE across the country has absolutely plummeted. Now there are some in your party that are saying that the country should abolish ICE. Do you feel the same way?
Okay, let me say this. As the former chief law enforcement officer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I know what it takes to reduce crime in a community and to build trust in a community. You do that by investing in law enforcement and investing in the community and by finding ways to bring them together. We've done that in Pennsylvania, and violent crime is down 12%. Fatal gun violence is down 42%. And one of the most important aspects to reduce crime is having that trust. What President Trump has done by sending ICE into Minneapolis against the wishes of the mayor, against the wishes of the governor, has been to erode that trust and make it harder for people to feel safe in their communities. I think what we need at the federal level is not spending tens of billions of dollars on ICE as they did in their last appropriations bill, but finally do real and meaningful comprehensive immigration reform. That's something that has been close in recent years. President Trump threw a monkey wrench into that at the end of the Biden administration. That is what we need. We need to get ICE out of the position they're in Minneapolis to restore trust. And we need policymakers in Washington to rein in this administration and instead pass comprehensive immigration reform.
So it sounds like you're not in favor of abolishing ICE. Can you give me a little bit more about what you think that comprehensive immigration reform should look like? Americans want stricter immigration laws, even though Donald Trump's support for his immigration policy has fallen. What do you specifically think it should look like?
Katie, I said this just a couple days ago at the farm show in Pennsylvania, where you have to come sometime, when I was asked about this. I think what is very clear is that immigration policy did not work under the Biden administration, and it sure as hell isn't working under the Trump administration. Let me be very clear. We need a secure border, number one. Number two, we need a pathway to legal status for those who are here and who are following the law. They need to know the specific steps that they need to take in order to have a legal status here in this country. And we need clear rules of the road for those who want to come to this country legally. I think that is comprehensive. That is also common sense. That is something that people in both parties want. What Donald Trump is doing right now is wreaking havoc on communities, is scaring people, is making life harder for our farmers in Pennsylvania, harder for our manufacturers to find work. And that, to me, is something that is upending not only people's lives, not only making people less safe, but it's also undermining our economy in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and across this country.
Let me ask you about something else the president is threatening. He threatened just again today, an hour ago, to use the Insurrection Act in Minnesota. He says that Governor Tim Walz doesn't have control of that state. If he does do that, what does it mean for you as another governor in this country?
I think all governors need to stand together against that type of unwarranted action by the President of the United States. I think it's clear that governors, certainly I can speak for myself, we have our situation under control. We see crime going down. We have trust between the community and law enforcement. When the president comes in and undermines that, the responsibility is his. Now, to try and make matters worse by invoking the Insurrection Act is only going to make people less safe. Look, I know with this president, there's typically a whole lot of bluster. I tend to ignore the bluster and focus on what he actually does. If he actually declares the Insurrection Act to be the rule or the law, and then further undermines and erodes the trust of the people, in that case in Minnesota, it makes everyone across this country less safe. And so I would stand firm against that. I think the president is wrong.
Do you think it's possible, given what we've been witnessing, and not just in Minnesota, but around the country, and the way that this administration talks about both migrants and protesters, is it possible for a state like yours, Pennsylvania, to work with this administration on immigration, to cooperate on immigration?
I think if the White House really wants to address immigration reform, have a secure border, have clear pathways to legal status, have clear pathways to citizenship, clear pathways to enter this country, then of course we can. But I think this administration has not shown a desire for reform, but rather just a desire to rip apart communities, to make people less safe, to try and isolate certain people in this country based on the accent that they have, demanding that people show papers who are American citizens. That is not how we do things in this country. So I think the Trump administration has shown a desire to be hateful as opposed to being hopeful in the sense of being able to create a pathway to some real reform. And their divisiveness is making all of us less safe.
So earlier this week, the president has threatened to pull funding from any state that has sanctuary cities. I know you've said Pennsylvania is not a sanctuary state, but there are sanctuary cities within Pennsylvania. Should Philly, Pittsburgh, should they still be sanctuary cities? Are you willing to risk losing federal funding over that fight?
You know, Katie, we are not a sanctuary state in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And every time this administration has tried to rip away funding, billions of dollars of funding that is legally obligated to the Commonwealth, I've taken them to court. And I've won, and I've gotten the money back for the Pennsylvania taxpayers who pay money into Washington, D.C. and expect to get that money back. I think this effort by the administration that tends to be against the law to rip away what is ours is wrong, and I'm going to stand up for my citizens in my Commonwealth and stand up for what is ours.
And allow the cities within your Commonwealth to make decisions for themselves?
Well, again, we're not a sanctuary state. I think that's more of a question for the mayors in those cities, but we are not a sanctuary state in Pennsylvania.